coming up on Dialogue Weekend. U.S. President Joe Biden has been in office for 100 days. What has he accomplished and how will Americans respond to his rescue plan?
We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future.
India sets a new global mark for a rise in daily coronavirus cases and faces shortage of medical and hospital supplies. What's behind the country's darkest chapter of the pandemic and how is it coping? And this week's Newsmaker, now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qinduo. U.S. President Joe Biden has delivered a speech to the Congress to mark his first 100 days in office. During his speech, Biden pitched a new plan about jobs and American families. He also talked tough on China, as well as plans for a new approach of practical diplomacy with the DPRK. What has Biden achieved in his first 100 days as president, and what sort of changes will Biden bring to the foreign policy arena, and what other challenges lie ahead for the U.S. president? To answer these questions, I'm joined by Professor Chen Hong of East China Normal University and Harvey Zodan, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So Harvey, I will start with you. Tell us about this performance for the first 100 days of President Biden. You know, there are some different, opinion polls. One of them, 538, gave it a B+. Not that bad, but not that, let's say, top one in recent times. So what's your take on that?
Well, Biden's rating is actually lower at this 100-day mark than his predecessors going back to President Truman, except Trump and Gerald Ford in the 1970s. But with the country as split as it is, he's actually polling very well. In addition to rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement on day one and holding the Earth Day Climate Summit, he's turned around the U.S. coronavirus situation from Trump's chaotic laughingstock to extreme competence. With the razor-thin congressional margins he has, Biden got the American Rescue Plan passed, one of the most expensive and aggressive stimulus packages of all time, and one of the most popular. But to me, the most important thing is that he's reversed not only the 4 years of Trumpian incompetence, but 4 decades of thinking that government is part of the problem, not the solution. Like his great predecessors, Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson, he showed that competent government can provide leadership, especially in times of crisis, and he's done it with both caring and with compassion.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned a very important point, I would say, in the U.S. political sphere, let's say, the role of the government. And President Biden also said by himself, this trickle-down theory has never worked. That's a theory mostly promoted by the Republicans, right? A new liberal market and trickle-down theory. So now comes the government. So this could be revolutionary. In that sense. And also President Biden mentioned about, American Jobs Plan, American Families Plan, the 2 bills he pitched to the Congress. Tell us about that and how likely, the Republicans will cooperate and pass that bills.
Well, we like to say that every president has a honeymoon period. It's of undetermined length unless there's a major screw up and until there's a major screw up. And as of this moment, Biden hasn't made any big boo-boos. The closest he's come is to dealing with the immigration influx at the southern border, especially children separated from parents. However, Biden faces challenges aplenty. There needs to be continued vigilance on the virus epidemic that will get worse domestically without more compliance, and especially with worrisome multiple mutations incoming from places like India. And because of Biden's razor-thin majorities in the Congress on pressing issues like gun safety and policing, there's only so much he can do by executive order. So legislation is going to be extremely difficult to pass and subject to being watered down. And similarly, his signature legislation to build back better, like the Jobs Plan and the Family Plan, have a very uncertain future with Republicans, especially in the Senate, fighting tooth and nail to eliminate them or to dilute them so much that they aren't terribly effective or problem solving. And speaking of the Senate, he might have to tackle the filibuster in the Senate, which currently means that most legislation, basically needs 60 votes to pass. It's an almost impossible barrier. So I'd say that his next 100 days are going to be much more difficult than the first 100 days.
Mm-hmm. Well, domestic affairs aside, during the speech, President Biden also talked quite frequently about China. Professor Chen Hong, for example, Biden said there's simply no reason the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. Basically, he's talking about the competition between U.S. and China. I guess that's all right. That's acceptable, let's say. People will say, yes, that's competition. Both countries try their best to innovate and to manufacture. So what's your response, from the Chinese side to, the U.S. competition?
Yeah, first of all, I should say that actually the Biden administration has largely adopted the attitude and mentality, of the Trump administration about China as the United States, major rival or competitor. And that aside, of course, when we talk about competition, competition is conducive. Healthy competition is conducive to healthy developments of the economy and improvements of people's livelihood. That is obviously true. But on the other hand, of course, a kind of, I think actually today in today's U.S. politics, there's a kind of, politicized parochialism, when the U.S. administration is thinking about China as its competitor. It's sort of like a kind of a hegemonistic understanding of the world, a kind of Cold War mentality, and that cannot be, really, so good for the, the world economy, and also even for the economy locally, and also for the whole world. It is obviously true that actually the United States can make wind turbines. Many countries can, but really we're living in this world of globalization. This is a characteristic, feature of today's world. So we must remember that actually the world is flat, and we have got this kind of cooperation and fair distribution of labor across the country, and also across the world.
Right. President Biden also said he's seeking, competition with China, not conflicts with China. But some people would say, if you look at the policy, if you look at the situation on the ground, for example, the Quad with other countries, India, Australia, Japan, everybody understands that's targeting at China. If you look at the tensions, basically escalating over Taiwan, with the involvement of Japan, people say, well, that kind of tension could lead to conflicts. So do you think that kind of worry is legitimate, Professor Chen?
Yes, I think actually as I said, I think the Biden administration has largely adopted the Trumpian philosophy of competition, of contestation. There's a much more, a kind of like a confrontational mentality on the part of the United States when, the U.S. is regarding, the rest of the world, in particular, its relations with China. I think actually there's a manifest, purpose for the Biden administration to contain the development of China. He's always talking about competition, always talking about China overtaking the United States, and the United States has to curb it. So I think actually, of course, this is, as we were saying, that actually this is a world of globalization. We are in a world of fair, live and let live, scenario. So I don't think actually this is a healthy mentality for the United States, but obviously that's the reality we are facing, the world is facing with. So be it, confrontational or in a more, peaceful and rational way, actually, I think actually China has to accept the reality, but actually China will be assuming a more, peaceful and calm, mentality.
Harvey, here, of course, they say competition with China, and then people see more competition, more confrontation, and a little cooperation between U.S. and China in the climate change area. We know President Xi Jinping attending the Earth Day Summit on climate change. But, the U.S. government, Biden, and his officials talked a lot about this, climate change is a central policy of U.S. foreign policy. But what we see is really seems China to be the priority rather than climate change. If you say climate change, I'd like to see more legislation in that area, right?
Right. Well, look, I think the situation here is what the famous Lord Acton said, that states have no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. And because climate change poses an existential threat to the whole planet, as the two most powerful countries and the two biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, our national interests fit like a hand and a glove. You have to remember that in 2015, it was the leadership of Presidents Obama and Xi that made the Paris Agreement possible. Even at our current time of great tension, it's not only that we can work together, but that we must work together. So the big question mark to me is if Biden is willing to share the leadership with China, especially, and also within the United States, if Biden can pass the necessary legislation with such thin congressional majorities. I think that part is going to be very difficult for him. And so all he has so far is his bully pulpit.
Well, and if you turn to other areas in terms of foreign affairs, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on Friday said, the Biden administration has completed its month-long review on the policy of the DPRK, adding that the U.S. is open to and will explore diplomacy in a practical way. So, Professor Chen, obviously the Biden administration's the message is like we are seeing a middle ground somehow in the middle between the Trump policy and Obama policy. So what kind of policy do you expect out of this Washington here?
Yeah, when Washington is talking about this practical, diplomacy, I think there's a deliberateness to differentiate the current, diplomatic style of the Biden administration from their previous administration. The President Donald Trump's, way of dealing with the DPRK in a more, glamorous, fanfare, all those kind of ceremonial activities, meeting up with Kim Jong-un, that kind of, very outgoing, very ostentatious, but in essence, there's a lack of, genuine, substantiveness. That is actually what I think actually the Biden administration tries to, let DPRK, let China, let the rest of the world know about its, way of carrying on with, talks with DPRK. I think actually for the Biden administration, there must be, a kind of, understanding of the world, in that actually, for example, like DPRK, there are some kind of, as we have been saying, kind of existential concerns on the part of the DPRK. So disregarding the real demands and requests and also the concerns of the DPRK, and only talking about denuclearization, that is not really realistic. So I think actually, of course, China actually promotes, denuclearization of the peninsula, of the Korean peninsula. But on the other hand, I think actually China concurs that there should be a realistic, practical way in dealing with the issue, rather than assuming a more hegemonistic and also imperialistic way of looking at the region and also the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, now turn to India, where a second COVID-19 wave has struck with a devastating impact. Indian hospitals are facing an extreme shortage of oxygen and beds. And what triggered this second wave, and why is it so serious? And how will India overcome this crisis? To find out more, I'm joined by Dr. Vikas Bajpai, a professor at the Center for Social Medicine and Community Health at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Professor Chen Hong, who will be staying with us here. So Dr. Bajpai, tell us the situation right now. We know Friday, for example, the cases is surrounding like is slightly less than 400,000 infections over there. And what's the projection, and when it is going to peak?
See, when it is going to peak is anybody's guess today. And various timelines are being given on the basis of mathematical models and all, but then mathematical models have been known to fail us even in the past. I think the tragedy clearly is far, far, far greater than what is reflected by the numbers as of now. And I mean, it's a mayhem let loose. The transmission of the virus is beyond control as of now. And I mean, people are suffering for things as simple as oxygen. And you don't need to import any raw material or anything of the kind to make oxygen. And it only reflects the complete and utter short-sightedness of the government insofar as COVID preparations are concerned. And even now, I mean, a lot of words are being said. Today our Prime Minister, he said, he called upon the NGOs and volunteers to help in anti-corona efforts. Now, what will NGOs do? And what is the capacity of the NGOs who themselves are dependent on their funding agencies as compared to the capacity of the state? And I don't know really what the government is waiting for to pull all the stops in providing relief to the people. So it's very sad.
Yeah, what do you think should be the priority right now? Should it be, say, the government engaging in like a testing, isolating, quarantine, or like a vaccination? So what should be the priority right now?
You see, the priority ought to be providing those things precisely for which people are dying. Okay, the priority should be to expand the medical beds available to the people with oxygen supplies, and I don't think there is any shortage whatsoever. If the government wants, all of this can be done very easily. There is such a big industrial base, and all these petrochemical industries, Reliance being one of them, which is closest to the ruling party, they are the biggest consumers themselves and producers of oxygen in the country. Why can't that oxygen be diverted? These companies, we are ferrying in, some of the state governments are ferrying in oxygen tankers or the vehicles from outside. Why can't the government take over the vehicles which are available, the tankers, vehicles available with these companies? It can very easily be done. Why can't schools and other public buildings being converted into field hospitals? And I mean, Prime Minister says that people should volunteer. Volunteer to do what? I mean, only if you create these kind of facilities that my volunteering will help. If you can provide me half a day or few hours of training, how to provide, how to handle, I mean, for example, helping the people breathe in prone position, and so kind of simple measures which can go a long way in providing relief to the people, rather than pontificating and speculating on what might be and all those kind of things. I mean, vaccination, the company, there are just two companies who've been given the responsibility of providing the entire manufacturing capacity in the public sector, some of the biggest manufacturers of vaccines in India, that is lying untapped. It has been allowed to rot. Government is still not doing anything to make them do the production of corona vaccine. And the vaccine companies on their part, perhaps India is one country where the same vaccine which is being exported to European Union at a much cheaper cost is being sold, or proposed to be sold in India at 2 or 3 times the cost. That is the kind of things which is going on. This is beyond understanding at one level, but then we know whose interests are being served by these kind of policies.
Well, that's a domestic situation. Doctor, what is, like, if you look at the international community, obviously many countries are concerned with the situation, because we understand that, as long as there are people who are suffering from this pandemic, everybody is insecure, and we need to work together to do something. Tell us, what can the rest of the world do to help India? Is it about oxygen, the shortage of beds? You mentioned that, not really. What about medical supplies or anything people can do? Other countries, NGOs, or organizations?
See, I first of all, I'd like to thank the countries who've made offer of help for India, and I am quite sure that all the countries around the globe, they realize that the stakes are not just for the Indians, but the stakes are for the entire world in controlling this huge tsunami that is presently is unleashing itself in India. Now, in terms of the kind of help and all, well, I mean, China itself has such a lot of expertise in putting together hospitals, and that too in concrete and iron, steel, and all. They did it in Wuhan, I know for sure, for that matter. And I don't know that kind of a help, if the Indian government, which ought to be prepared to accept it, it would go a long way. And WHO said that they would be providing prefabricated units and all those kind of things. We need oxygen. We need vehicles for transporting it. We need medicines. Anything, any such help, whichever way it comes, would be, I think, very welcome at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Professor Chen, I know the Chinese government, trying to help, but right now it seems to me like the private party is playing a very important role. Tell us more about the Chinese assistance, and tell us what more can China do to help here.
Yes, well, as we know that yesterday, on Friday, President Xi Jinping sent a message of condolence to the Indian Prime Minister Modi, expressing, condolence, and also offered help, to the Indian people and the Indian country, with whatever China can do. And also yesterday, State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi also had a telephone conversation with the his counterpart in India, the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. So what actually Mr. Wang Yi actually said was actually very clear that China is willing and it will be encouraging Chinese businesses to produce and also to deliver medical supplies to India. China is going to offer logistic, facilitation, for example, like customs clearance, like transportation, facilitation, and also, he's also offering a very important, aspect of cooperation, that is actually to organize teleconferencing, video conferences between the Chinese medical workers and also the Indian medical professionals, so that actually there can be some exchanges of experiences that China had accumulated during its combat against the COVID-19. I think actually China is, India's biggest, neighbor country, and there are a lot of things, the two countries can work together to fight the common enemy, that is the coronavirus. As the previous speaker, the Indian doctor, was saying, that actually, the virus respects no borders. To help others in this battle, in this global battle against the COVID-19, is to help yourself. So actually, this is definitely a global battle we're actually engaged in.
Well, thank you, Professor Chen. Let's leave there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. Joining me to discuss this young man is Ms. Liu Yunyuan, Associate Executive Editor of Beijing Review. Welcome to the show, Yunyuan. The 27-year-old Russian model, Vladislav Ivanov, who goes by here in China, everybody calls him the Lelouch. He became an accidental pop sensation in China for his not excellent performance of dancing or singing, but reluctant performances on this reality TV called Produce Camp 2021 competition show, which aims to make a new pop group every season. Tell us, why did he become so popular? I know, okay, you're reluctant to perform, but why, so many people are in love with him?
Thank you. It's a very interesting phenomenon because when I saw his internet fame, I did not know why. So I actually Baidu'd him, and now I know why. First of all, he is very good looking, and this is something you have to be in this internet age, and he looks very cool on camera. This first and foremost. But secondly, as a foreigner, he can speak very, very good Chinese. So the Chinese people can actually relate to him and saying, wow, and people are amazed by his level of Chinese. And thirdly, I think it's mainly because of his personality. And he has this kind of character, which is he's very honest, and he speaks his mind like, oh, I don't want to go to the show. I was forced by somebody else, and I have to stay here so that they can win. So this actually demonstrates kind of teamwork spirit. He is there because of his teammates, and he has to work hard. He needs to keep up, and he cannot drop out in order for his team to win. And I think another thing is he's being really, really modest. And when seeing his online interviews, and he said there are a lot of people who are better than me, who can dance better than me, who can sing better than me. I am just being lucky. And he admits that I am not as talented as many other people. So when netizens are watching his show and they're thinking, wow, he thinks just like I do. So the kind of relation they can relate to his experience actually arouse people's interest for him.
Mm-hmm. Well, also his this case, particular case, some people would say it touches upon the Chinese, especially among the young people. They call it subculture here in Chinese, 丧文化. Basically, it means like a demotivational culture. People kind of like being dissipated, dejected, or frustrated. I don't want to be really famous, or rich or successful. I just want to be myself. It also touches upon the kind of a controversial culture of overworking, right? So he's honest. He stays true to himself. Tell us more about this subculture among the Chinese young here.
You mentioned people, the kind of demotivational. People are not motivated, or people are saying, the life I'm living is good now, so don't push me too hard. And I think it's a new social phenomenon. You see, for my generation and the generation before me, we are dreamers. We are looking for good jobs, good life, and we're looking for good everything. But for my son's generation and the so-called Gen Z, our dreams come true. So they're living the life of what we've been dreamed of. So when I asked my son, I said to him, you have to work hard so that you can live a good life. And he retorted, and he said, am I not living a good life now? So you can see that there is a huge change among the mentality of the Chinese, younger generations, which is different from our generation or my parents' generation, that they've taken everything for granted.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and they are not very motivated to win, and they are happy with their life now.
This is a particular subculture among some of the young people. Interesting development here in China. Well, thank you, Yuan Yuan. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests again. And you can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Qinduo, one word. Thanks for watching. See you next week.